Good morning. As the previous election proved and many of our speakers have indicated, the cooperatives were born in politics, and as many people say, they will die in politics. If they ever do die, let us hope they never do. This morning's presentations are focused on that concept. As always, we've had Senator Heitkamp here last night. We'll have Congressman Kramer and Senator Hoeven here this morning as well. But our first two presentations come from two of our long-standing partners, the Rural Utilities Service and the Western Area Power Administration. And first up, I'd like to ask Mark to the stage. Mark Gabriel is the administrator of the Western Area Power Administration. And Western is one of the power administration, of course, that Basin has been in lockstep with these many years. And Mark, over the past 24 years, has been an executive in the energy industry. He's one of the other gentlemen joining us here who has written a book, Visions for a Sustainable Energy Future, which won the 2009 Indie Excellence Book Award for environmental writing. We'd like to welcome Mark Gabriel.
Good morning. You guys can do better than that. Good morning. Thank you. It's most of you are so far back, it's a little hard to see, but I want to thank you first for the opportunity to address you today. I will say that the relationship that Western has with all of you and with Basin is a model from my perspective that I wish we could duplicate across the country. It is a multi-decades relationship and one that shows the power when we all work together and the cooperative nature of how we can make things work across this country. I also want to reflect a little bit yesterday on the comments. One of the things that really struck me as I thought about it last night is all the issues that we talk about, and I'll talk about in a moment, the solutions to those issues and those challenges are sitting in this room. If you think about it, the electric industry over its 100-some-odd-year history has always dealt with the challenges and turned them into opportunities, whether it was building out electricity in rural America, whether it was meeting the needs of generation through the 50s and the 60s, whether it was building nuclear power plants, whether it was dealing with energy efficiency, the coming of competition and deregulation. All of those things have been managed by the people in this room. And I think that's really a testament to how we operate as an industry. The answers aren't going to come from outside, they're going to come from inside. Most of you know Western. We've been around for 37 years. You can see the regions that we cover. And one of the privileges I get as the administrator is to visit and work across the country as we represent the Power Marketing Administration. The key to Western success, in addition to its relationships with all of you, is really the people that we have. Just a couple of weeks ago, we had a leadership program at Western, and I was surprised to learn that when Western was formed 37 years ago, we had 900 employees and a budget of about $177 million. Today, we have roughly 1,400 employees for a business that's about $1.5 billion. So a significant increase in responsibility and accountability, and yet what I consider to be a very lean, mean fighting machine as far as the staff is concerned. The vast majority of our people, like the vast majority of your folks, really deal with the reliability and delivery issues of the system, and certainly in our role as marketing power from 56 hydro facilities across the western United States, that we keep our overhead people like me in a very reasonable level, and I always want to point that out. Western's focus has really been defined or continued to be defined by the strategic roadmap which we developed in cooperation with our customers and with our employees. We've really looked at 4 pathways. The first one, which is important to all of us, is really how do we operate in a way where our business, technology, and organization is in the most excellent, and by that I mean efficient manner. The second really pathway for us is around our mutually beneficial partnerships. And it is something that is exemplified by our relationship with all of you and that with Basin. And certainly we have to figure out over time, how does this new energy frontier work, and what do we do in terms of evolving the services that we need to provide as we market, deliver clean, renewable, reliable, cost-based federal hydropower and all of the related services that are required. We're all facing some challenges, and these challenges are kind of unique in the sense to the electric sector, but the way I believe we're going to move forward is to work on these problems, find common solutions together, and make sure that we add value to everything we do. My comment to you today and my plea really is, how do we figure out what are the big rocks? What are those things we should be focusing our attention on as we go forward? So let's touch on a couple of them very briefly, because these impact Western certainly as a large transmission provider, as well as someone who's involved on a day-to-day basis in the power markets. The intermittency of generation obviously creates challenges for the operators of the system. One of the things that I'm most proud of is the Electric Power Training Center that we have in Golden, Colorado, and the number of congressional and other important folks that we get to go through there. Because it's easy to say, yes, solar is going to take care of the problem, or wind is going to take care of the problem. But until you sit there behind a control board to actually see what impacts that has, that there are men and women behind the scenes and behind the curtain actually making the electrons flow, that lack of understanding, I think, can also often lead to policy and questions that are not clear or can't be answered without understanding what's really happening. Varying hydro production is something which we have to live with on a regular basis. We've got certain parts of our system at Western that this year, thank goodness, we had plenty of hydro. I look across to the west where we operate in California, and we're down to 24% of 30-year average. So how hydro production varies over the course of time is a huge issue for us to understand. And I know you can't read that little colored box that's up there, but what that looks at is when we don't have hydro production, in this particular case, out of the Glen Canyon Dam, this shows what the impact is on CO2. Because it's not just the loss of the hydro revenue, but it's the replacement of that power with coal and natural gas, which are obviously very viable, important fuels for us. But how we manage that creates challenges as we look at CO2. And of course, as a fisherman, my favorite little picture there is the humpback chub. We can talk about it offline, but having to figure out how do we manage around environmental restrictions for the protection of species at the same time that we continue to produce hydro is one of the core questions for us. There's been a lot of discussion about 111D, and I'm not making any political statements. All I'm trying to figure out for all of us is how do we manage into a future where the intermittent resources are coming on, some of our traditional fossil resources are going off, and what does that mean for those of us who have to sit back and actually run the system? Trying to understand which plants, when they're going to close, how it's going to happen, and that timeline is very, very important. And I fundamentally believe, regardless of how 111D works out for all of us, the change is going to continue. And we as an industry will have to figure out how do we manage through that changing time. The markets are obviously a key issue here. I can't thank the folks from Basin enough and my staff who's sprinkled around this room for taking on this task of joining a market in SPP. When I first came on a couple of years ago, or 20 months ago, one of the questions I asked was, how are we going to defend the decision that we make to A, join a market, and B, which market do we join? And the team went back, worked with the folks at Basin, worked with the folks at Argonne National Labs to try to understand what is the right decision, not just from a philosophical perspective about a market, but also from the economics, so that we can look at it and use it going forward as a tool. We face this kind of market decision right now in California with the energy imbalance market, and we use the same tool to decide, at least for now, that Western and its customers are not going to be joining the EIM because it didn't make sense. We used the exact same model with the same logic path to why it does make sense for us to join along with Basin and the integrated system SPP. So we can stand on firm ground on our decisions and our decision paths. What's going to happen in the rest of Western's territories, we're still looking. I mean, we're working right now with Tri-State and Excel to understand, should we move to a license plate transmission rate? There's different solutions for different regions, and I certainly wouldn't suggest that we are going to have a one-size-fits-all. I will say, Peter yesterday talked about the 51st state. I almost assumed that was going to be New York, Washington, D.C., or Puerto Rico. But thinking about Alberta, which is shown on this map, it actually makes a whole lot of sense since we have a transmission line up there. The hunting and fishing are really good, and the Canadians are so nice we could probably just ask them to join. But one of the things that we all have to face is how system operations will change. If you haven't seen this chart, this is known as the duck chart. This is showing, happens to be California, and what you're looking at here is that by somewhere in the 2022 timeframe, California during the day is going to have an overgeneration of between 13,000 and 14,000 megawatts. And at peak, when the solar generation disappears, there's going to be a ramp somewhere of 30 to 40,000 megawatts. And so you see that belly right there, and the various lines on the bottom of the duck show you various penetrations of solar. The punchline here isn't that any of these resources are good or bad. The punchline here is when you look at that ramp and what we may face with wind, and we're going to face with solar, and we're going to face as we have to operate a diverse system, means that the system we've designed and operated for 50, 60, 70 years is going to be managed and operated in a different fashion. That change is going to be one of the biggest issues we have to figure out as an industry. And as I said in my opening comments, I fundamentally believe that the people in this room are the ones that are going to solve this challenge. I talked about the integration with SPP. That's proceeding apace. My anticipation is that it will move through with FERC. We have begun the public process to modify our Upper Great Plains transmission rates. I just signed a Federal Register notice for meetings last week that has been moved on from the Deputy Secretary. So that is in play, and we're trying to work diligently to make sure that we are in alignment with the SPP rate process. This is a major undertaking. It's keeping a couple of our attorneys at Western busy full-time, and I think it's going to be a new world for all of us. We're going to discover many, many things in going into this market. I think it's the right decision at the right time. Of course, we are continually concerned about our infrastructure. The folks at Western have worked diligently in ramping up an asset management program, which I predict within a year or two will be the envy of the electric utility industry. We are already finding out two very important things from the asset management program. The first one, and the most important one, is that there's no smoking guns out there. Working with all of you, working with the Western customer base and our technical teams, there's no, I don't believe, hidden secrets out there about things that should have been invested in. That said, we're getting some tremendous data. We're verifying what we need to invest in, and we're going to get a better picture on how do we keep this $3.8 billion investment that you all have made operating and operating well. It doesn't mean we don't have day-to-day fluctuations. These are fairly recent pictures, as you can see. The one on the bottom left is a structure from, it looks like July of 2014. So as we know, this is part of our business. I do want to talk about physical security just for a minute because this is one of my greatest concerns. The Western system since January 1st of this year has had 34 incidents. And now some of the incidents are what we just assume are normal, sadly normal vandalism or theft of copper. But I can tell you 6 or 7 of these incidents are much more nefarious. People breaking into substations and control centers, doing no apparent damage and taking apparently nothing. And we're very concerned that these are just probes. They're trying to test our defenses. And I would suggest all of you, when you go back to your utilities, you really understand, is it a theft or is it something deeper? And this is across Western service territory. What you're looking at here was one of 3 break-ins that occurred in Arizona at our Liberty substation. You've all by now heard about the Metcalf attack in California. We have to be extremely diligent. One of the things that we have done at Western is we'll have completed the analysis of 65 substations for their security measures. You heard a lot yesterday about SIP 14 and SIP 5. We have to be very careful. My number one concern, obviously, is the safety of our staff and your staff as we share systems and share equipment, because these are the key elements that we're going to have to deal with going forward into the future. It is a new world, but I'm confident we can get through it. Bottom line is, Western and all of you have invested in new technologies for years. I do bristle sometimes when I hear folks talking about that we have a third world grid, or that somehow there's a new technology that we've been ignoring as an industry. I just don't believe that at all. I have faith in this business, as I have for the past 25 years of my career, that we are making the right investments. We have to continue to lever those investments and continue to make the investments. And the question is, how do we make the most of those? You know, I think back to that great movie, Apollo 13, when I hear of some of the concerns, whether it's 111D or security, and there's a comment in the control room when everything looks bleak about, gee, this could be a terrible disaster, and Gene Kranz says, contrary to that, I believe that this will be our finest hour. And I believe that Western, in partnership with Basin and with all of you, really will be able to not just manage, but really thrive in these challenging times. From Western's perspective, we're focused on delivering on our mission, using the strategic roadmap really as the core for how we move forward, operate safely, securely, and reliably, and make sure that we manage all of our resources effectively. Western impacts about 40 million Americans, and I never forget that fact anytime I'm in front of any audience, from my neighbor to the folks in Congress in Washington. We've got an extremely valuable resource. We are going to continue to manage that commitment. And again, I want to thank the folks here at Basin and all of you for your continued support. Thank you very much.